People ask you all the time, when you live in the mountains, like, do you get sick of the view? And my answer is no, because I think that every day it's different and it changes and it's still beautiful.
It's actually one of the best places to walk in the world.
We have streams, we have beautiful fields and meadows, we have areas that are really easy to walk on, very accessible. We have some crazy, strenuous climbs that are fun to do.
New Paltz, it's breathtaking. Anywhere that you walk around, you see the ridge, and it's so pretty. I came my freshman year and just kind of like hopped on a hike before a meeting even started, because I really wanted to be outside. And so the first one I think that we did was in Minnewaska, and then I've done a bunch of hikes out in the Mohonk Preserve and the Mohonk Mountain House area, and those, state parks up there on the ridge.
I would say like the ridge has like almost become like a sort of home for me over the past like 4 years that I've lived here.
The mountain, I have a great panoramic view of the Shawangum Range right to the back of the house. And when I was a young child, it was just always a source of inspiration, And I remember I was probably 9 or 10. So do you think the Shawangum Mountains are maybe like the 15th highest mountain range in the world? And boy, did they make fun of me about that. But there are days I look out there, I still think it's one of the 15 highest mountain ranges in the world. It's so subjective in a way. When I was a kid, Shawangum, anybody pronouncing Shawangum, we knew was an outsider. They weren't from the area, unless they lived on the other side of the mountain. The best guess at the literal meaning was in the Smoky Air, or where the Smoky Air is. It has long been pronounced Shawangum, which is a corruption, a shortening of the original name. The aesthetic environment and the history in this area are very closely linked. Well, and I get all my heating fuel off the land. I cut down the trees that are starting to block my view of the mountain or that need culling for one reason or another. So when I was a kid, we called this area Evergreen Forest. There's lots of red cedars. And they've been supplanted, by these hardwoods. Most of the trees that I cut, I count the rings, a lot of them are only, 60, 70, 80 years old. That's a black walnut that I had cut, because those two trees definitely infringed on my view of the mountain. I've hiked all over the Shawangum, camped there. I have a cabin I built up when I was 22. My main focus, I guess, in all my history books is the relationship of people to the land.
So the Travis Mountain Hamlet was an assemblage of kind of subsistence farmers, or just kind of people who were assembled in a group. There was a sawmill and everything there.
This was a community that existed in the landscape for a long time, and especially in the 1800s, they were pretty self-sufficient. And some of those people living in that area were pretty isolated. They didn't even have electricity, some of them, until the 1950s. Those people were blueberry pickers in the early days.
So I was aware that there had been a berry picking industry, and I thought it disappeared by the 30s or something like that. Much more recent than that it went on even in a remnant form through the late 50s and early 60s. And then I got some names of people, and I started, visiting and interviewing, and it just took off from there. The whole story of the huckleberry industry, the wild blueberry huckleberry industry in the Shawangum Mountains, and this was from mid 1800s until mid 1900s. These are people earning their living off You know, wild berries. They were not in any sense cultivated. They didn't even use picking baskets. They picked by hand. The only cultivational technique they used was setting fire to the mountain because berries grow well on burnt over land. And from the lower socioeconomic strata, few of them couldn't even read and write. They never knew, where they would be living, wherever they could get like free or extremely cheap rent. Not all of them. There were some of them that were close to middle class. During the summer, they were their own boss. They were up on the mountain. Nobody had to hire them. Nobody could fire them. They were commercial foragers. In the 40s, it was a whole different story. You had the war. You had the young men were away at war. Women could get good-paying factory jobs for the first time. All sorts of war-related jobs. Industries, opened up. And so the people who remained up at the berry camps tended to be much older, the heavy drinkers, the unskilled. And when the war was over, Hype Addis, one of the berry pickers and berry buyers, told me, he says, it was just a different world when the war was over. People didn't just go back to doing what they were doing before. All kinds of new technologies and new jobs and industries opened up. So the people who stayed on after the war with a really hardcore, remnant who didn't want to give up that way of life. And again, most of them were older, many of them were heavy drinkers.
They became stone carvers, and a lot of the Mohawk Mountain House used that to do part of the mountain house, some of the surrounding areas that they had to use retaining walls for carriage roads.
Some of them got choked up telling me they bond with the mountain, feeling like this were the happiest years of their life.
We have people from the community constantly helping us because we have over 8,000 acres.
I oversee our volunteer naturalist programs such as Peregrine Watch, the Phenology Project, and Stream Watch. So for Peregrine Watch, peregrine falcons are a New York State endangered species. So myself and volunteers will go out there, we'll set up like a spotting scope, and we'll scan the cliff for signs of peregrine activity. And the peregrines can be very easily disturbed by climbers or any other type of human disturbance, so it's really important that we close our climbing areas anywhere within sight of the nest site that the peregrines have decided.
Early 1960s, people started climbing, and then the traps is kind of our main draw as far as climbers here.
The first climber was Fritz Wiesner, who immigrated in 1929, and he used to climb in the Hudson Highlands, and then he discovered these cliff bands up here, and he pioneered the first climbing routes. He brought over a clean climbing ethic from where he was from in Germany, which was Dresden. I started out as a rock climber here in 1969, and part of the ranger responsibilities, of course, is to maintain safety. And if there's an incident where somebody needs help, we're prepared to go on a cliff, do a high-angle rescue, and you can approach your climb and then finish it, do another climb. Some climbers do 10 climbs a day. Some climbers might prefer to do 3. I think because of the proximity to New York City and the other metropolitan areas, within an hour or two you could drive here and spend a day climbing and have a very good time. The access is terrific because you walk on a carriage road below the cliff, and the main cliff is right above us from this visitor center we're in right now.
I always find that I just feel very in the moment when I am outside in the gunks. I'm able to focus on just what I'm able to observe, what I can see, hear, smell, feel, and it's nice to get out of your head in that sort of way. and look around at the outside world around you and appreciate that it just goes on, and it's kind of inspirational in a sense.
As a kid, you know, looking at that mountain was the biggest inspiration in my life in many ways. And, you know, this is all dairy farms. When I was a kid, it was still a farming community. And it just, you know, when we moved to Queens, I mean, nothing in Queens compared to this, you know, aesthetically or acoustically or anything else.
It seems like almost everybody in town has experienced the preserve in one time or other, and they leave with a smile on their face.